People who experience chronic and stable worry, referred to as trait anxiety, are thought to be poor decision makers. This is seen in the popular media through such headlines as "Your anxiety contributes to your bad decisions" and "Why anxiety makes you a sucker for bad advice." But this association is actually also seen in the experiential psychology literature, which finds that trait anxious individuals exhibit more biased decision making. A bias is a systematic deviation from an optimal form of choice. So framing bias, for example, causes individuals to evaluate choices reliably differently based solely on whether potential outcomes are described as gains or losses. But what is still unknown about biases such as framing is if they can be reduced in trait anxious individuals. Therefore, the goal of this study was to examine if the experience of decision outcomes can reduce bias, framing bias particularly in trait anxious individuals. To do this, I used a task in which repeated choices are made between a sure option, either a gain or a loss, and one of two gamble options similar to decks of cards. When given this task, framing bias appears as a preference for the sure gain over the gamble and a preference for the gamble over the sure loss. But to sort of overcome this bias and perform optimally on the task, participants must reduce bias and learn that one of the gamble options is better than the sure gain and one of the gamble options is worse than the sure loss. Finally, because framing bias is assumed to be emotion-based, I measured skin conductance response, which is an index of autonomic arousal. When given this task, we find that participants who are high in anxiety actually exhibit increased bias. But importantly, they are able to reduce bias over time through experience with decision outcomes. Skin conductance results revealed framing bias is driven primarily by responses to the sure gain outcome. And interestingly, when we give participants more time to consider their choice options, we find that trait anxious individuals make less biased decisions, in fact, identical to their non-anxious counterparts. So what we can conclude from these results is that trait anxiety is in fact not synonymous with biased decision making. Past research has found that trait anxious individuals exhibit more bias. We show that, at least in the case of framing, bias can be reduced through experience with choice feedback. In sum, when given feedback on a decision, when given time to consider that feedback and update choice information, trait anxious individuals can reduce emotion-driven bias. Simply put, they are no worse at decision making than the rest of us. Thank you.